Buenas, buenas, buenas. I'm Vanessa, the host of Chicklit, a podcast where I share my honest reviews of books that I think Latinas, first gens, and women would enjoy. Please subscribe and follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Spotify, and YouTube at Chicklit Podcast. I have weekly YouTube episodes where I talk about my life and more current personal matters, so if that sounds like something that interests you, you can find that on my YouTube channel, as well as my podcast episodes. Please enjoy today's episode on the second book of the A Court of Thorns and Roses series called A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. In my first episode on this series, we learned that the author is known for her fantasy series, Throne of Glass, A Court of Thorns and Roses, this one, and Crescent City. She's a millennial born in 1986. She's from New York City, and as a child, she enjoyed creating stories based on popular tales or myths like Sailor Moon, fan fiction, and we love Sailor Moon. I have fallen down the fan art wormhole with the series, and I've never done that with any other book. I'm honestly devastated that I finished today's book and that I'm going to read the next 3 books, and it's eventually going to be over. I'm nowhere near done, but I'm already so sad that the series will eventually come to an end. And I spent so much time looking at fan art and also people's book reviews on Goodreads. And also, just like today's author, Sarah J. Maas, she was writing, fan fiction. There are people doing that for her books now too. I saw this one lady who is writing the books and scenes from Rhysand's point of view, and I love that. It's just I feel like I'm cheating on Sarah J. Maas. It's her characters and it's her book, and so I'm reading someone else's work about that book and about those characters, and it doesn't change anything. It's just from their point of view, and I feel kind of icky reading it. I don't know if that's just like a me thing because the author herself wrote fan fiction, so I'm sure she's okay with them doing that, and I think it's also really common too, but this was just the first time that I've ever done any of that where I'm deep diving, appreciating the art, and wanting and needing more from the characters. So I don't know, I find myself being laughing at myself for being so into these books. It's like people who are into Harry Potter or people that are into Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones. It's a little cheesy and corny, but I love it. So if you're on the fence, this is me telling you it is worth the hype. Those things are cool. And Dungeons and Dragons, we kind of judge people for being dorky or something, but it's not. It's an escape from our current world. So again, if you're debating whether or not to go into it, just do it. Just trust me. Just go do it. There are 626 pages in today's book, and I thought that was a lot until I learned that the next book in the series has 707 pages. That's 3 books. 2, 4, 6, yeah, that's 250 pages each book, 275 each book. The next book could be 3 books in and of itself. And today's book was 626. The next book is 700. It's a lot. But we got time. If you got time to be on Instagram and TikTok and buying random stuff on Amazon and sitting on the couch and watching all the TV shows and watching all the movies, you can read a book. You can read a book. You can do it. You can do it. So again, I'll stop saying it, but if you're on the fence, just go do it. The genres, as you might know, are fantasy, romance, and young adult. And to be honest, I would really suggest listening to the first episode that I did on this series, because that'll give you a more comprehensive background, because this is a part 2. I'm obviously going to do a little bit of an intro to the first book, just so that if you didn't listen to the first episode, or maybe you did listen to the episode, or maybe you read the book and you need a refresher, I will totally do a refresher. But there's just a lot of world building and there's a lot that goes on. So I would suggest reading the first book, listening to my first episode, and if not, if you don't want to listen to me, fine. Here's the refresher. So in the first book, Farah, it's hard for me to pronounce her name. I want to say Farah, but I think it's Farah. So Farah, she is a regular person, and her family used to have a lot of money. I think dealing jewels or something. They were sold jewels. I don't really know. And they lost all of that money, and so she had to take it upon herself to make sure that they were eating. So she would go out as a young girl and hunt for different foods so that her and her sisters and her dad could still eat. And that's a lot. Like for a child to have to take care of everybody, that's a big responsibility. And so in the last book, she was hunting and she crossed paths with a High Lord, and he took her in his wing and they fell in love, and she was made aware of this evil person, Amarantha, who was trying to like take over the world. And so as a regular human, she has to pass all these tests in order to like break the spell or, you know, stop the evil person, Amarantha, from doing, you know, taking over the world. So she goes, she gets captured, she's like tortured, she has all these crazy things that she has to pass. She ends up, you know, killing 2 fairies. They're mythical creatures, but like they're people, you know, they have their lives and their feelings and loved ones, and she has to kill 2 of them in order for like the greater good, right? She has to, you know, do really strenuous things. Like she had to fight like a big ass worm, like, you know, that was like 100 feet tall or something. Like she had to do pretty crazy stuff in order to survive and save the world. And while she's doing that, there is this evil High Lord named Rhysand, which again, I want to say Rhysand, but I think his name is Rhysand. So he's also captured by Amarantha, and he's her whore. Like he has to have sex with her for 50 years. So when Farah comes in and she has all these tests, the evil guy who was a whore for Amarantha, he's like, listen, I'll help you beat this lady because he doesn't want to be captured by her anymore. I'll help you pass these tests if, after everything's said and done, you agree to coming to my evil court, and which I think is called the Night Court. You need to come to the Night Court and you need to spend 1 week a month with me if I help you. And she wants to pass all these tests. She wants to save her sister, save herself, save her love, Tamlin. So she agrees. She's like, okay, you'll help me pass all these tests and get safe and not die. So I agree to your bargain. I'll agree to this deal. So in that first book, she passed all the tests, but at the end, she dies. Like she officially is dead. But all of the High Fairy, all the High Lords of like the Spring Court, the Night Court, the Day Court, the Fall Court, like all of the courts, they all come together and they use their powers to revive her, and they make her a fairy. So now she's immortal. She went from a girl that was like hunting and barely surviving in poverty to now she just survived death, she saved the world, and she's an immortal fairy who, you know, through this second book, she learns that she has powers as well. Like I'll get into that in a little bit. So that's the recap, right? And so now she's back at the Spring Court with Tamlin, and Tamlin was like, that was very painful for Tamlin too, watching the love of his life die in front of him and have to do these very intense, impossible tests and like challenges. And just every corner she's like dying, and so, or almost dying. So when they come back after she defeated Amarantha, all he wants to do is protect her. He doesn't let her leave the house. He doesn't tell her anything is wrong. She's just kept like guarded and away from everything, and it's with good intention. I think it's with good intention, and because he loves her, right? But also he knows that if anyone gets to her, that's how they could get to him. And he's a High Lord. Like, he's very important in this realm, right? So if someone gets to Farah, like, they're getting to him. Like, she is now his weakness, right? So he does not let her train her new powers. He doesn't let her explore them. He won't let her help now that there's this new danger. She doesn't even know what the danger is, but she wants to help. And he won't let her at all. He also has a lot of workers in their home who like kind of keep tabs on her, like they're bodyguards. If she goes for a walk, they're like 10 paces behind her. If she's, you know, taking a shower, someone's there. If she's getting dressed, someone's there. Like, there's always someone watching her. And the one lady who is like her like helper in the home, like the worker that's supposed to support her the most, when this Amarantha person came in and took over 50 years ago, this woman, her name is, I don't know how to pronounce it, Ianthe, I don't know. Let me look it up. Yeah, Ianthe. So the Ianthe, when Amarantha came, Ianthe ran away. She did not help at all to save the world. And this is the person that is keeping Farah's company and like spending the most time with her. And Farah is the one that saved everyone. So right in that moment, it was not implicit, but for me as the reader, I did not like Ianthe. I did not like her because it's like, how could you run away? And I know I was just watching on Instagram. I don't know her name, but she's very popular. She had like this viral video where she's like, I can't relate to these protagonists who are gonna like risk their lives and like go straight into danger to save everyone. She's like, I can't relate. And I disagree. I think that most of us, like a large percentage of us, like 85-90% of everyone on earth, if you are placed in a situation like Farah's in, I think a lot of us would step up to the plate. Would we be successful? I don't know. But I do know, I feel like not a lot of people would run, you know, because when you see very intense things happen in our real world, you know, specifically with like certain wars and terrible times that happen, so many people come together and step up to the plate. So I just don't subscribe to that. Like, you know, do I think that I would like, I'm gonna be just like Farah if this happened to me? Like, I don't know. I don't know, right? But I would like to think that a lot of us, including myself, would rise to the occasion. So I just want to put that out there. So she comes back, she's miserable. Her being with Tamlin reminds her of being held captive with Amarantha. Like, she's not allowed to do anything. She can't even have her own, you know, thoughts, or she's having nightmares and no one's there for her. Tamlin is also having nightmares as well. And they kind of process things like differently. Like, they're not there for each other. It's very tense. Like, they just went through a really terrible thing together. So not that I agree with what Tamlin is saying. I'm just saying that I understand that route that he went down, right? And so Lucien is Tamlin's right-hand man, and he was not as lucky as Tamlin and Farah. His this woman that he loved was killed, I think, by his brothers and his dad. And so now that Tamlin and Farah have this second chance, he is not, I think he's like stuck in a hard place because he doesn't agree. I don't think he agrees with what Tamlin is doing and how he's treating her. He's like, you know, like, Farah, like, just stick it out. Like, he loves you. He's just trying his best. Because he feels like, what would he have done if he had a second chance with his love of his life, right? So I think he's, you know, really sad that he lost the love of his life and he doesn't know what he would do. And now that they have a second chance, I think he's just like rooting for them. He doesn't want to tell Farah, like, yeah, that's right, he's fucked up. Like, he doesn't, it's like, guys, you survived. Like, let's just be happy you survived. Like, I understand that too. Again, don't agree, but I understand Lucien's point of that, right? So it's exhausting, right, for Farah. She is completely depressed. You know, she used to paint as a human, but now after all of this, she's so drained. She feels so weak. Like, she doesn't even like fight back anymore. She has no energy in her to stick up for herself or even believe that she has any power. And it's really sad. It reminds me a lot of Twilight. The one, I don't know which book it was, but when Bella was depressed when Edward left, it just reminds me of that. It's like she's so sad, so withdrawn, so weak, and it just reminded me of, like, that's how like somber and sad that this time during this book is. It reminded me of that time with Bella when she was depressed that Edward left. So Tamlin and Farah are supposed to get married. They love each other so much. This was in the plans from the beginning. 3 months after she survived, she's now a fairy and she's immortal. The wedding day comes, right? And you're hearing her internal struggle of, you know, she doesn't feel comfortable. She's super depressed. And she's walking down the aisle and she's in her head like screaming like, help me, like, someone help me, I can't do this. So she's like stepping, and in that moment, like, he puts his hand out to her and she's like, no. But in that moment, that's when Rhysand comes. And he claims a week with him once a month. Like, that's when he comes in and claims it, is when she's screaming and asking for help. So in that moment, you are like, wow, they're getting married. Like, this High Lord is getting married to Farah, who just saved the world. And that is when you're going to claim you're weak is during their wedding, you are just like, you are an asshole, you're a piece of shit. Like, how could you do that to them on their wedding day? He has no idea. He had no idea what she was saying in her head, what, you know, the thoughts that she was having, that she was second guessing it and was about to say no. So she goes with him. But it's very clear early on that he did actually hear what she was saying. Like, you think he didn't know, but he heard her screaming, and he went and he grabbed her and took her away from the wedding because she was screaming for someone to help. He's like, oh, you know, she's like, I can't believe you took me on your wedding. He was like, well, you were calling for someone to come save you, so you should really be saying you're welcome. And it's like, oh shit, he can hear her thoughts. Like, that's fucked up. That's crazy. And so it's like, that's the first time where you're like, not the first time, because several times he had been nice and almost like a bad boy a little bit. Like, you don't really see him doing anything terrible at all. It's just everyone thinks he's evil. And so this is their first interaction where it's like, oh, he just kind of saved her a little bit. Like, she's screaming for help and he came and saved her. Like, and is it like, what's the ulterior motive here? Like, why is he really doing that? So she's in Rhysand's court, and the night court, and she first describes it as the most beautiful place she'd ever seen. So many beautiful words to describe this evil High Lord's home. Jasmine scented, snow drifting off the peaks of the mountains like wandering mist, lush plants, thick rugs, not a scream, not a shout, not a plea to be heard. She thinks she must not hear the torturing screams happening in his court because they themselves are indoors, like in his home. So she's like, oh, they're just being tortured and we just can't hear them. He wants her to learn how to read, so he gives her reading lessons and is like it's like kind of annoying, like the things that he says. He's like, the things that she has to read and she's like struggling to read. It's like, Rhysand is the most sexiest man alive, and it's like, it's stupid, but you have to remind yourself that it is like YA. It's not going to be much more exciting than that. So she's learning how to read. He also encourages her to explore her powers. He wants her to put her shield up because, you know, he could hear everything that she was saying. And he was like, it's very dangerous. I'm not the only person who can read your mind. And if you let the wrong person into your mind, they're going to see everything. So if you have a secret or, you know, whatever it is, you want to have a shield up. So he encourages her to learn how to read and to write, and also to get better at that shield. So that first week, he leaves her alone. You think, oh, he's gonna torture her. They even like implied that maybe he would like sexually assault her, and he doesn't do any of that. He's teaching her how to read. He wants her to practice her powers, and he completely leaves her alone so that she can have a moment to herself. And I think it's because he saw how terrible it was with Tamlin, that he's like, all right, this bitch needs a second, like a break from everything. So he leaves her alone. And he also says like how angry he is at the spring court for not showing her power. Like, he's constantly frustrated that they let her think that she was weak and small and not capable. Like, that's a common theme throughout the entire book, from the first like week that he has her throughout the whole thing. It's like, you are powerful and you need to believe in yourself. And just with that, you see why I'm doing a book review on this book, right? Like, just with that, I'm like, okay, I fuck with this book. I like, we start to like Rhysand. Like, we aren't sure, and Feyre's not sure up until like fucking 75% through the book, which was, I think, way too long, but whatever. So like, for a lot of the book, you're like, like, what's gonna happen? But for me, from the beginning, I'm like, him wanting her to explore her powers, I love that. I thought that was sexy as fuck. We love that about him. He's kind of like that bad boy who was good to us. Like, I love that trope. I love that. He even like tells her that she could be a high-ranking person in the world, because right now she thinks that she's just like a regular fairy, like a low fairy. But he's like, why not? You saved the world and now you're a fairy. Like, you can be a high-level person in the world. And that's something that Tamlin never did. He also shares with her what's really going on in the world, which again, Tamlin never did. He tells her that the king of Hybern has been planning to take over the world, and that Amarantha was nothing. She was just like a little like appetizer to what this king of Hybern is actually planning, and that there's something scarier coming. So she throws herself into reading lessons and shielding her mind for the rest of the week. And on page 112, she's describing what reading books does for her. And I think it really encompasses chick lit and like why I choose to do a book review podcast and like why women in general really like these types of books. Farah says, reading had filled my time, giving me quiet, steadfast company with those characters who did not exist and never would, but somehow made me feel less alone. Books were perhaps the only thing that kept me from teetering into utter despair. Like that, like someone the other day was asking me, like, oh, why books? Like, it's actually my mentor. She asked me, like, why books? Like, why can't you just do movies or songs? Like, why are you doing books? And I told her, I was like, when I was a teacher, I was very depressed. And specifically during COVID, it's like, you just read a book to escape. And then here I am reading this book like a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks after my mentor asked me why books. And Farah perfectly described it. It's like seeing Farah excel and go through these terrible, hard things and still being here and still trying and still being herself and still loving and not letting it break her. That's powerful. Like, and I know it's fictional. Like, obviously, we're talking about fairies and stuff and high lords and, you know, reading people's minds and stuff. So I'm aware of that. But it shows you an example of strength. And, like, these are lessons that you can learn and apply to your own life. Like, and I honestly really started this was when I was a teacher. I would tell my students all the time, like, read books. And they're like, oh, do you read? And I'm like, no, but I should. And it's like, when I was talking to my students, I'm like, you learn. Like, if there's a girl that, like, has a boyfriend and she, you know, say cheats on her boyfriend, like, you just saw that character go through that. Like, are you going to go cheat on your boyfriend? No, because you know what happens when you cheat on your boyfriend. You feel terrible. And, like, you break people's hearts and you have that karma and you have that weight with you. So it's like, it's just like that point of, like, you learn through other people's mistakes. You don't need to necessarily make every single mistake. You can watch other people do it or read other people do it and learn from that. So I just love that she said that, and I feel like it really applies to chick lit and like reading in general. While she's there at Rhysand's house in Night Court, she meets his circle. He meets Morgan, Azriel, Amren, and Cassian. Rhysand was best friends with Azriel and Cassian because they survived the ruthless training in some other court, even though the three of them were outcasts, so they trauma bonded together and they're like brothers. Morgan is Rhysand's only other living relative, his cousin, the girl Morgan. They call her Moore, I think. I think that's what they call her. And then Amren is his second in command and is almost portrayed as like an alien who came to their world by mistake before anyone else ever existed on Earth. So she's been around for like over 10,000 years, whereas like Rhysand and Azriel and Cassian and Morgan, I think they're around for like 500 years. She's almost like a little bit weird because she's been around for so long and she's like an alien and she's the only one. Like, you know, there's a bunch of fairies, there's all these different types of mythical creatures, but there's only one Amren. She's the only type on Earth, so that's his right-hand man. And there's a lot that goes on between them, and like they go deep into how they connected and all their personal lives, but I just feel like I want to focus more on Rhysand and Farah, their relationship, but I think it's really important and very cute and I love them, and I actually hope that the next book is kind of through their lenses. I would love to have a book of like the supporting characters you know, like where we don't really hear much of like Rhysand and Farah, and we hear like one chapter from Morgan, one chapter for Azriel, one chapter from Amren, one chapter from Cassian. Like I would like that point of view shift because they're great and really great supporting characters. So feel free to read that if you want to get more into it. But so she meets all of them and she likes all of them, and then she, you know, her week is up and now she goes back to the spring court with Tamlin and Lucien, and they immediately make sure that she's okay and they want to hear everything that happened. They think that he sexually assaulted her or like imply it and used her like a whore, like the way that Amarantha used him. They think that he did that to her, and like obviously Tamlin would murder him if that happened, or try to at least. And they think that he messed with her mind, making her see things, manipulating her vision or her memory and stuff like that. And she says that none of that happened, that there was a war coming and that she knew what was happening, and that she wants to explore her powers to help out, just like she just helped out before. And Tamlin immediately shuts her down and says that that's out of the question and she will never be able to do that. So the first conscious time that Farah dislikes Tamlin is 15% through the book. When he charges someone who doesn't have money to pay taxes, he still charges her. He's like, okay, you have 3 days to pay. And she's like, okay, what is 3 days gonna do? If she doesn't have the money today, what's 3 days gonna happen? Like, she's not gonna have it. So what she does is she gives this water wrath mythical creature. Farah gives her a necklace, a bracelet, and I think like other jewelry as well. She's like, hey, like, here's the money. We have so many jewels and riches. Like, we don't need this. So here's my jewelry, and you can use this at the market to boost the economy, right? Like, you're using that to pay for goods, and then that merchant is going to have the jewelry to go do that. Like, it's just like helping out the local people and helping this creature pay her taxes as well, because if not, I forget what was going to happen. But Farah hated that. She did not like how Tamlin was going to do that to her. And like, so that's like where you start to like turn the corner a little bit. Like, and before it was like an internal struggle and it was like a her thing, but now it's turning into like she doesn't really like Tamlin anymore. And this is when she starts to realize a few of her other new powers as well. She goes into someone's mind for the first time by accident when she's hoping Lucien will stick up for her against Tamlin, and he doesn't. So she, by accident, she's like staring at him being like, say something, like, help me. Like, she's not saying it out loud. Like, in her head, she's like, say something, like, help me. And she just by accident slips into his mind, and she notices how sad he is, how guilty he is, how hopeless he feels. And so we start to give him some slack, or just more so understanding for not sticking up for her. And in that same scene when she slipped into his mind, she's so mad that Tamlin is like restricting her and Lucien's not really saying anything. She's holding onto the table, and she realizes that she burned the table with her hands. So she's realizing, like, okay, just like Rhysand can go into my brain, I can go into other people's brains. And in that same moment, she can, like, use fire to her advantage. And another power that she realized that she has is when, in, like, a similar time period, she's talking to Tamlin about how caged she's trying to tell him, like, I feel so caged with all these guards and never being left alone, and he's not hearing her, and he's like, no, never, like, we have to keep you safe, you can't help. She blew up her paint box, like a box of paint. She blew it up, but she herself did not get any paint on her because she put a bubble of protection around her. So now she's realizing, like, I just blew something up, and also I can give myself a protective shield. So she has so many powers. Like, usually you just have, like, a couple things or maybe one thing, but she has so many different things. And later on we find out it was because all of the High Lords, when they were giving her power, they all gave her a little piece of their own power, which is also dangerous, right? Like, all these people have all these powers, so they're thinking, like, I just gave her a little bit of my power, so, like, I need my power back. So it's also like you have to keep it a secret a little bit too, because they're gonna want to kill her and want their power back. So that was Tamlin's kind of take on it. Like, if they find out how powerful she is, they're gonna kill her. Whereas Rhysand's like, they're gonna want to kill you, so let's make you strong so that they can't fucking kill you and you can protect yourself. Like, we'll all protect you, but also, like, you have to protect yourself as well. So obviously that makes the most sense, I think. And she just really, starts to realize that, like, as a human, she needed one thing, which was protection and help. But now that she's immortal and everything that she's been through saving the world, she needs something different. But she just didn't have the energy to explore that, which was really sad. It was really sad to watch, honestly. So a month later, Rhysand comes back to claim another week with her. Immediately, he interrupts the weak thoughts that she's having of herself. Tamlin's teeth are right next to, like, Rhysand's neck. And she's like, oh my God, I would be so scared. And he's like, I want to remind you that you would not be scared. You slapped him the last time that he did this. So it's almost like Tamlin's like, what the fuck, what just happened? Because Tamlin can't read her mind, but Rhysand's reading her mind and talking to her in front of Tamlin and speaking power into her in front of Tamlin, in front of her man who loves her and is not speaking power to her. It's, like, so ballsy, like, which is sexy, right? Like, if your man's not treating you right and then this new evil guy who treats you well, he is gonna, like, step in and speak power into you. Okay, Rhysand, like, we love him. And so she goes to the night court, and he's like, oh, why don't you like have breakfast with me? And she's like, don't you have other things to do? Because, you know, Tamlin is so busy with all this war and the king of Hybern coming, or whatever terrible things are happening. She's like, don't you have to like go do stuff? And he's like, I'll always make time for you. And in other instances, when she's too tired to fight back, you know, when Rhysand's like trying to tell her, not necessarily no, but like telling her things that she doesn't agree with, like Rhysand tells her, like, fight back, push me, force me, participate. And like if there's something that she wants to know, he's like, ask it. Like, always take up space. And he's just constantly empowering her. And in this second week that they're together, he opens up to Farah and shares that while he was Amarantha's whore, being tortured and beaten for almost 50 years, it almost pushed him to like end his own life if it weren't for his courts that he is the High Lord for. So we start to really like him. Like, I really liked him from the beginning. Like, not the very beginning, like, right? But all of these things, you're like, okay, like, you're a bad guy going good for me. So Rhysand brings her back to Spring Court, and this is when shit really goes left. So Tamlin is going out to fight and protect the townspeople, and Farah is saying that she's gonna go with them and is debating sneaking out to go and fight. And Tamlin locks her in the house. He puts a shield around the house so she can't leave. So she slams her hand into the invisible barrier, and there's no movement, nothing but hardened air. And she says she had not learned enough about her own powers to try and push through to shatter it. She's like, I let him convince me not to learn those things for his sake. Lucian tries to tell her to be patient, but she can barely hear him over the roar in her ears. Crushing black pounded down and rose up from beneath, devouring and roaring and shredding. She felt trapped just like she did with Amarantha. She's spiraling and wrapped that raging force around herself as if it could keep the walls from crushing her entirely. Morgan comes to save her. Rhysand had felt her freaking out through their bond, through like the agreement that they have. He felt that she was freaking out. And since he was a High Lord, if he would have went to go save her, that would have been like a treasonous like act, and it would have started a war. So that's why Morgan had to go and get her. When they go back to Rhysand's town, his court, Farah decides that she doesn't want to go back to Tamlin. She wants to stay with Rhysand. And that is when he shows her, like, I know I'm like the High Lord of the Night Court. He's also the High Lord of the Court of Dreams. And his town is called Velaris, and he's kept it secret forever to keep it safe during all of the terrible things, like all the possible wars and stuff. So Rhysand offers to provide food, shelter, and clothing if Farah helps him fight against the king of Hybern. So she's slowly starting to realize that Rhysand is not terrible like everyone says he is, and so she agrees to stay, and they take it day by day. Like, if she wants to leave at any point, she can always go back to Spring Court. That's when Rhysand shows her Velaris, the city of starlight, and swears her to secrecy now that she's better at her mind shields. So no one can know the city exists, or else they would go and destroy the city. And that's why he, you know, that's why he kept going, and that's why he didn't like end his life. It's like for his friends and family, but also because of the secret court that he's the High Lord of. We love a committed king, you know what I'm saying? So everyone thinks that he's like the High Lord of the Court of Nightmares or whatever, but he really is the High Lord of, you know, this city as well. And Velaris is the city that she described earlier, like that beautiful area. It has tea shops with delicate tables, with chairs scattered outside, cheery fronts full of chattering, laughing, high fae, and beautiful fairies. Several markets, and she realized that no one treated her differently for saving everyone from Amarantha. No one gawked at her, no one cried in her presence, no one judged her, and no one even looked at Rhysand, which was very different to her experience in the Spring Court. In the Spring Court, it was almost like she was like a god, and she did not like that power. She did not like people looking at her as like a savior and putting her on this pedestal. Like, she did not like that attention at all. So now when she goes to Velaris, they all know that she saved their lives, but they're not like bowing down to her. So it's like, it's a respect thing. They know it and they appreciate it, but it's like, okay, let's move on here. She loves that. Like, she doesn't have like almost like a stage fright. She doesn't have like celebrities when they go out. Like, she doesn't have that pressure when she goes out. So just a more positive experience so far in the Court of Dreams. So at this point, we're like 50% of the way through the book. And that's when she starts to get comfortable and realize that the shift that's happening inside her. And she eventually accepts that this place is now a home for her. She realizes that she actually enjoys Morrigan's company. And she had never felt that before. You know, I cried like a little bit. I didn't cry actual tears, but like my eyes got misty just thinking that I've had so many wonderful female relationships throughout my entire life. You know, I've had friends who tell me that everything that I do is right and I'm great and I'm amazing, and I've had friends tell me like, bitch, you have to work on some things. I've had friends who I've gotten drunk with. I've had friends that I go to school with. I've gone to like friends' churches. Not that I'm a churchgoer, but I've just had so many friends and experiences where I feel safe with the women in my life. And she's like 20 years old and is just now feeling it for the first time with Rhysand's cousin. And that was so sad for me. She realizes like, Morrigan is my friend, which she didn't have at the spring court with Tamlin or ever before in her life. So it was like just very sad, but obviously you're happy for her. But it was like a really sad realization. Like, what a sad life. Like, I can't imagine being, 20 years old and never having a friend. But because she was living in poverty and struggling constantly, like, she didn't have time to make friends. It was like, wake up and go find food. Wake up and survive. Wake up and survive. Wake up and survive. Don't make connections. You can't make connections at that point. So she tells herself, if she survived Amarantha, she could survive, leaving Tamlin and transitioning into this new version of herself, which resonates obviously so much. You go through so many things. At a certain point, it's like, I've already lived a couple lives. Like, this next life is going to be fucking hard. But like, if I did that, I can do this. And I think that's a really good skill to have, and I don't think a lot of people do that, where it's like, I did this hard thing. Like, even going to college, like, if you went to college, like, that is such a big accomplishment. If you did that, you can do another hard thing. Like, if you got a job and you left your job, that was really hard leaving that job. You can do other hard things, so it's like, you're kind of like building like confidence blocks, and so that's what she's doing now with them. She's kind of doing it herself. Like, Rhysand is pushing her, and like Morrigan is there for her, and she's coming into herself, and it's her doing it by herself, but they're supporting her as well. At one point, she's, having a nightmare and is thrashing and unknowingly using her powers because she's sleeping, obviously. And unlike Tamlin, who like left her alone when she would have those nightmares, Rhysand comes into her room and takes care of her. When she tries, he like shakes her awake and he's like trying to be there for her, but she pushes him away and runs to the bathroom to go throw up. And all of a sudden he's there holding her hair back for her, and still, that's such a vulnerable position to be in, where you're throwing up your fucking life into the toilet, and he's still there. He's holding her and being there for her and kind of supporting her through that. And you kind of wish that she was doing it alone, but it's like really nice that he's there. Like, the romantic part of you, it's like, okay, it's just a book, he can go be there for her. It's okay that a guy is helping her, and like, to have someone care for you when you're at your ugliest or most vulnerable, and your inner like subconscious is coming out, her guards are down. Like, I think that's something that all women want, is to like be taken care of. Like, at your worst, at your ugliest, it's like, love me anyways, don't leave me. Like, I think that that's like a wish, right? And I think that's kind of like the point. And I think that's like, when it comes to like marriage and like long-term relationships, I do think that is what it is. I'm not saying don't be disappointed. Like, you can be disappointed and be frustrated. I'm not saying that, but it's like, don't leave. Like, be there for me anyways. So now they have to, she's processing, she's getting stronger, she, building these relationships, she's coming into herself. And one of the first tasks that they have to do to like beat this king is to retrieve this millennial old book, but it's in two halves. Half of the book is with the humans and half of the book is with the fairies. And so they did that to split the power. If just the fairies had the book, then they would have all the power and access to the power in this cauldron. And again, I want to remind you that it's YA. This is young adult, okay? So to keep that in mind when we're talking about like cauldrons and books, right? So the fairies have one half, humans have one half, because when the book comes together, it gives this cauldron all of this power. So they're like, the fairies already have magic, so if they have all the power, they're not going to help the humans. But if the humans have all the power, they're just going to get rid of all the fairies. So this was like a good balance, they thought, to keep the harmony with humans and the fairies, right? But now that this king is trying to like use the power to like kill everyone, they're like, we have to combine them. We have to find a way to convince the humans to give us the book, and we have to go find it. They don't even know where the half that's with the fairies, they don't even know where that is. So they're like, we have to find that first one. Find the fairy one is the first task, right? So in order to do that, they start training physically, because eventually she's gonna have to fight. There's a war coming eventually. So they're like, you know, while we figure out where this book is and how to find it, you should start training with Cassian, because Cassian is like a really good combat. He's like the best combat fighter that Rhysand knows. So she starts training with him to learn how to like physically fight people. And they both use, Rhysand and Farah, they use Cassian to make each other jealous, just like in this one scene. Rhysand was suggesting that they should sleep together if she's so lonely, and Farah is like going along with it, but she's angry and upset like the whole time and frustrated. Like it seems like they're flirting and like giving each other the out, but Farah deep down knows that she wants him, but she can't really articulate it yet because she's still, you know, processing leaving, you know, Tamlin. So one of her powers that she's gonna have to use is like a locating power, right? So like she has to locate an object without physically seeing it. So Rhysand sends her on a mission. He sends her to the Weaver's home to find an object, and he doesn't tell her what it is. She needs to go into the space and have the object, whatever it is, lead her to the object so that she can get better at that skill, right? So she goes into the Weaver's home, and the Weaver is blind, so she has to be like, Farah has to be quiet and like tiptoe everywhere. It's like a hoarder, like this Weaver's a hoarder, and she's just walking around and she's looking, you know, at the cup, at the plate, at the book, and then this ring. She just feels drawn to it, and she gets the ring, and the fucking Weaver realizes, she's like, who's in my home? So she has to escape this Weaver, and she almost dies. But she does make it out. So now Rhysand's like, okay, cool. Like now you know that you can use your abilities to hunt objects, and you can also control yourself and get out of sticky situations. Like he's letting her struggle and grow and come into her power by herself. He's not just saying like, oh yeah, you can do it. He's like, there's this fucking task that you need to do, and you need to survive it on your own. And he did not step in at all. He was like out, and he was like, oh, how'd it go? And she's like, bitch, I almost died. But she got out of it. He's purposely putting her in those situations to make her grow, and he's trusting her, which again, Tamlin did not do. This whole thing is basically comparing Tamlin to Rhysand, which I kind of hope in the next book they don't really do as much, but whatever. So they go to the summer court, because that's where they think that the fairy half of the book is. And it's this 3-day long trip. The night court is spending 3 days in the summer court. So Farah has to put on a show and pretend to be into the new High Lord of the summer court, so that he could possibly just like give up the book willingly. Like she's kind of hoping like, if I tell him the truth, he'll just give me the book. But that's not how it works. Like when we're talking about like politics and wars and stuff like that, you can't just honestly like speak to people and hope that they're on their side. Like you have to like go and make shit happen. So she's pretending like she's into him, and while she's pretending, Rhysand is getting close to the summer court's High Lord's cousin. Like Farah is with the High Lord of the summer court, and Rhysand is with his cousin. And this infuriates Farah. Like she thinks that they end the night together, that Rhysand goes home with her, and she avoids breakfast the next day. She doesn't make eye contact with Rhysand the next day when she does eventually see him. And later on, when she does, you know, talk to catch up and see, you know, oh, did you find the book? Did you see anything? Like when they're trying to, you know, summarize and recap what was happening, he tells her he was just pretending and that nothing happened with them. It's like right in front of them that they love each other, but we think that Rhysand is just respecting her space from breaking up with Tamlin, and they eventually do find the book. And like I was saying earlier, Farah gave the water wraiths, she gave them the jewels to pay their taxes. So when she's in the summer court and she's getting the book that's like high, like really well guarded in the middle of like the ocean, she starts to drown. Like, she has the book in her possession and she starts to drown, but the water wraiths, because Farah had helped them, the water wraiths help her and like stop her from drowning and get her out of the water. And they're like, you know, our sister's debt is paid. So it paid off. Like, her helping out the water wraiths paid off, and they saved her life. So it just proves that she does make good decisions, that she is leading and making all these things fall into place in order to win. And so it's very exciting. They have the first book, great, amazing, and now it's time to get the second half of the book from the humans. And they decide to use Farah as Farah's family home, where her sisters live, to be the meeting point for the human queens and Rhysand and the Night Court, right? Elaine is Farah's sister, and she's a full-grown adult, but Farah sees her as like this fragile girl, because remember, Farah was taking care of her for most of their lives. But now Elaine is engaged to someone who hates fairies, and like I think his job is to like kill fairies, and it's like that's kind of awkward because now Elaine's sister Farah is a fairy. So is he gonna kill her? Like, can Farah even go to her sister's wedding because he's a fairy killer? Like, it's just like this awkward, tense thing that you know is gonna be a problem. Maybe not in this book because there's a war, but you do know like this is a topic that needs to be addressed. That Elaine is marrying someone whose job is to kill her sister's species, you know. Nesta, if you remember from the first book or my first episode, she was able to block out Tamlin's glamour. He like made something look better than it was, and Nesta, it didn't work on Nesta. Like, his powers did not work on Nesta. She's also super cold as well, so like if you're being nice and trying to win her over, she's not the bitch to like fall for your shit. She's not with the bullshit. So from that first book, you really notice, like I knew, I'm like, she's gonna be a fairy one day because the magic's not working on her. She's a no bullshit type ass bitch, and she's really strong personality. Like, there's no way she's just gonna be a human. That was my thought, right? And another reason that made me think that she was going to be turned into a fairy one day was when she meets Cassian, they hate each other immediately. Like, there's a very intense, like, tension. And so it's too strong just to be for a human, like a human and a fairy. Like, it has to be that Nesta, like, her soul is, like, destined to be a fairy or something like that. Like, I don't know the exact mechanics of it, but I just know that she's going to be a fairy one day. So yeah, that's just the meeting point for the queens, and they meet them a couple times to try to convince them, like, we need your half of the book. And obviously they're like, why the fuck would we give our human half of the book to fairies? You're just gonna wipe us all out. And like, they don't trust them, which like it makes sense, but like us, we're like, no bitch, give them the book. Give them the book, please. So whatever. Rhysand and Farah, they pretend yet another time when they go to the Night Court. This time they're pretending that Farah is his little sex toy, because he puts up his front that he's this evil, torturous High Lord, and he makes pretend that she's now with him and he's using her for sex, and that's all that she is to him, just like some whore that he's fucking, right? So when they're in the city, they first get there, everyone is kneeling before Rhysand, right? He's the most powerful High Lord ever born, and everyone is like kneeled down, head down, and he goes to Farah and lifts her chin. So everyone is facing down, but he lifts her chin to like make her special and holds her face to his and welcomes him to his home. And like us as the reader, we know that that's not his home. That's not his real home. But everyone in the room, he has to put up this front that he's this evil guy, torturous guy, ruthless, and they have to pretend like that's his home, when really we know his home is truly Velaris and he's a nice guy. So she's there pretending, and he commands her to stand up, and she stands. Obviously, she has to listen to him, and he stares at her body and tugs at her waist and has her sit on his lap, and like they've never touched like that before. And his hands were cold when he was touching her, so he warmed his hands, like, you know, through power, because, you know, it's all an act. Like, he wants her to be comfortable, so he's like, oh, my hands are cold, like, I'll warm them. But it's all internally, like, it's all, like, no one else knows. It's like part of the act. So we are in on their little secret, and also his 2-3 friends, they're also in on the secret, but like out of the thousands of people that are there, no one knows. So it's like you like that as the reader. You like to be in on the secret. And also them touching. It was such a sexy scene. And I think it was like them putting on a show. It was obviously a very sexual scene. He's touching her thighs. He's feeling like the wetness between her legs, and like she's tingling places, their voices, the breath on their neck. Like it's very, very sexual, and like we like that. But it's like putting on a show for people, and like they're watching and pretending. You know, like people watching, and also you're pretending to be something. Like it was just so many layers of like sexiness. I loved that scene. I wish it was like real. Like I'm sad that like the first time that they were touching was like for fake. He apologized beforehand, like when they talked about her pretending to do that to really sell the point to Tamlin that she was like not with him. He had apologized. He's like, listen, it's gonna get really terrible, and I feel really bad for how I'm going to speak to you and how I'm going to treat you. Like, he apologized in advance. Like, if you're going to read the book for any reason, honestly, it should be for this scene. Because it was so fucking good. Loved that scene so much. She also, at one point, like, toward, I think, the end of the scene, she was talking about how that whole interaction of them pretending and touching each other and, like, you know, feeling sexy, like she said, she was like, it just showed me how starved I was of touch and how lonely I was for so long, and how joyful it was to be like touched and held and alive. Like that is when she was happy to be alive, was in his lap, in his hands. You know what I'm saying? It was really sad. I felt bad for her. So they get through that scene, the point is made, and Rhysand has to let Feyre into his mind to see a recent memory of him getting information from like this creature, where they find out that Tamlin is looking for Feyre and he won't stop until he finds her. So she had thought like, okay, I left, he gets the point, I'm not with him anymore. But turns out he's like, no, he's looking for her and he wants her back. There's also this other scene where they're in the woods training, and there's so much that also goes on, like small things that lead up to the big ending. And one of them was they're training in the woods, and Lucien finds them, and he's like, Feyre, come with us. And she's like, no. And she finds out that she can also shapeshift. She gave herself wings. She doesn't have wings, but she gave herself wings as a way to shapeshift and pretend like she could do that. And so at the end of the day, they still need to go get the human half of the book, and they hook up for real. Well, and it's not even for real, because he's like, oh, tell me what you want, which was hot as hell, asking for consent, first of all. But then she's like, I just want a distraction. I just want to have fun. And he's like, okay, fine. That's a really, really good sex scene as well. They don't even have sex because he's so, like, respectable. Is that the word? Like, he respects her so much. He's like, I can't fuck you in a room where I can't, like, fuck you against the wall. Like, it was too small of a room. They wouldn't have been able to, like, have as much fun as they could have. So he pleasured her instead. And she wanted to pleasure him, and he was like, no. Like, you go to sleep. So the next day, I think they're continuing training and they're going somewhere, and people attack him. And we think it's Lucien knew where like the general vicinity of where they were, and they went and they found them. They tracked him down. And Rhysand was flying in the air with Feyre, and they shot them down and they captured him and they tried to kill him. And so she has to save his life. Like, they're in the middle of the woods by themselves, so she's running around looking for like a suitor, which is like, I think someone that just like knows a lot of history or knows a lot of shit. And so she tracks one down, and she's like, how do I save him? There's poison, like they tried to kill him, how do I save him? And the suitor tells her, or the adder tells her, he's like, all you have to do is feed him your blood, you know, since you're mates. And she's like, what? He's like, oh, you didn't know? You're mates. So you're mated for life, you're bonded for life. So that is actually why they can feel each other. It's not their bond or their bargain. And that is why he made the bargain, because he's like, yo, you're my mate. He knew from the beginning that they were mated. And so that's why he made the deal. It wasn't to torture her. It's like, fuck, she's my mate. I have to be near her. I have to see her. I have to make sure she's okay. And so she feeds him blood, and he turns out to be okay, obviously. And she's pissed. You know, she's like, you kept me in the dark. Why didn't you tell me? And he's like, I couldn't tell you. You know, you were still recovering from Tamlin. If I told you, you know, it would have just changed the dynamic. And I agree with him, because had he told her, like, day one, like, she needed to process and come out of the terrible situations that she was in order to be in a situation to be able to fall in love with him, and she did. She fell in love with him on her own, and like she obviously felt the pull, like, you know, they can read each other's mind, and she feels his pain sometimes, like when he has nightmares, his shield would come down and she'll feel it, you know, like, so they're connected and she feels that connection, but he just didn't want to, like, he didn't want to force it on her and make it into like this obligatory thing, like this obligation, you know, like he wanted her to like fall in love, you know what I'm saying? So that took way too long. Like that was 75% of the book, and it's like there, like I said, there was a lot of small little things, and like I liked it, it was good, but it's like their romance was like, they like the first time that they had sex was like at 75%, and like they found out that they were mates at like 85%. It's like it was just took too long. Like, and even this episode, it's too long. Like this is too long for us. When she was a human, on the human side of like the wall, he felt it like briefly, but then when she went to the spring court with Tamlin, it felt stronger, like it was clearer. And then when she became a fairy, it was like, whoa, you're my mate. Like he knew for a fact, like immediately, like once she was a fairy, he was like, you're my mate. And the bond kept getting stronger and stronger for him, and he just protected her the whole time. He always thought that because she had painted stars as a human, and he saw them through like their bond, that he was a prisoner, that's what kept him alive too. Like when he was Amarantha's prisoner, obviously it was his people of his town, his friends and family, but it was also that like he saw her painting stars, and he was, you know, the High Lord of the Night Court, and she's fucking a human painting stars, and he was like, whoa, who is this person that's keeping me alive? That was like part of what gave him hope, and that's why he helped her since the beginning of the first book. And that's also why she couldn't marry Tamlin, I think. I don't think that was explicitly told in the book, but it's like she was about to marry Tamlin, and their bond was what was creating that panic and was stopping her from, you know, she physically could not marry him, and I think it was because of the bond. Like their bond was keeping her from marrying Tamlin. But at the end of the day, there's still a war that's gonna happen. So they have to pause their mate shit, and they eventually do get the human book because one of the queens doesn't trust the other queens. There were 6 human queens, and so the one was like, you know, don't trust them, they're like backstabbers or whatever. So she gave them the book without the other ones knowing. So they get both the books, and Amren is reading them, and you know, they go try to bring it to the cauldron to like turn the cauldron off, basically. And it turns out that Tamlin had been working with the king, and the king had been working with the human queens, saying that he would turn them into immortals if they worked with him. And the king used Feyre's sisters as examples. Tamlin would let the king break down the wall to the humans if the king had gotten Feyre to Tamlin. So it was a setup, essentially. Like they got the book to get to the cauldron so that Tamlin could get to Feyre, so that the king could go to the humans, and so that the queens would be able to turn into immortals. So of course what he does is he turns Elaine into a fairy. And again, Elaine's fiance is a fairy killer, and now she's a fairy. Like he turned her into a fairy, and he turned Nesta into a fairy. And when he turned her into a fairy, Cassian was like so they're obviously mated. Oh, and Elaine is mated with Lucien. When Elaine turned into a fairy, Lucien was like, you're my mate. So now Elaine is engaged to a fairy killer and mated to a fairy, and a fairy herself. And Nesta is obviously now a fairy. Like I said, I called that. That one I knew from the beginning. And now she's mated to Cassian. And so obviously Feyre wants to protect them. She doesn't want to like take away their human lives like that. So she's, you know, very scared. And she, you know, tells her sisters to go with Rhysand to the Night Court while she goes with Tamlin, right? And the king is like, oh, okay, I'm going to break your bond now. And so when he breaks their bond, they do break the bargain, the agreement of her having to go back with Rhysand, you know, once a month. They break that. And they pretended again. Feyre and Rhysand pretended again in this last scene, or one of the last scenes, where they pretend that they're no longer mates. They're like broken, like shattered, like, no. And she's like, no. And he's like, no. But it's like, they were both pretending. And at that point, because we didn't, like, as a reader, you don't find out that they're still mates until, like, that next page. But when I'm like, no, they're not mates anymore, I was like, and then I flip the page, I click the button. I don't flip the page, I click it because I'm reading on my Kindle. And I'm like, ah, and they are still mated. I'm like, thank God. Oh my God, thank God. Like, the whole point, you can't spend 600 pages talking about them being mates and being together to fucking take it away in the last page. And so she goes back to the spring court, pretending like she's her old self, pretending like she's this, like, quiet, like, meek person, and she's not mated or connected to him. And turns out that the night before they went to the king, to, like, the cauldron with the book, her and Rhysand got married. So really, actually, she's the high lady of the night court. She's not just a fairy. She's not just Farah who saved everyone. She is the high lady of the night court because she married Rhysand the night before that they went to go on that, you know, expedition to go save everyone. And so the last couple pages is her back in the spring court pretending like, oh, I don't know my memory. I don't know what's real or what's fake. Thank you for saving me. And, like, it's obviously hard for them to be apart, Rhysand and Farah, but they know, they're still communicating through their mind, being like, I love you and I'll see you soon, and they're going to destroy the spring court from within through Farah. So that's what the next book is about. But now, you know, the king has all the power with the cauldron, and now Farah has to take everything down. So you know it's going to be a shit show. I think that next book, learning from this episode, it needs to be 2 separate episodes. So just keep that in mind, that the next book is going to be 2 separate episodes, because my throat hurts from talking so much, nonstop talking. My ears hurt from these things. Like, my brain hurts, my eyes hurt. I just want to take a nap, honestly. If you like today's episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. New episodes are uploaded on Monday mornings. I'm posting weekly videos on YouTube recapping my everyday life. You can follow me there, and you can follow me on social media at Chicklit Podcast. And remember, if you have any book recommendations or want to be on the podcast, let me know. Thank you for listening. Bye.